South Asian domestic servitude. In South Asia, trafficking often hides in plain sight. Across India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal, recruiters approach poor rural families with offers of well-paying domestic jobs abroad. For parents facing crushing debt or famine, it can seem like salvation. Once recruited, victims, mostly women and girls, are moved through legal or forged travel channels into the Gulf states. There, under the kafala sponsorship system, an employer legally owns a worker's visa. Upon arrival, passports are confiscated. Promised wages vanish. Days stretch to 14 or more hours of work without rest. Sleeping on floors, denied medical care, and enduring verbal, physical, and sometimes sexual abuse becomes routine. The crime's concealment is its greatest weapon. Victims are isolated inside private homes, invisible to neighbors, unreachable by rescue groups, and cut off from outside help. Escape is almost impossible. Those who try risk detention or deportation as runaways, treated as criminals rather than victims. This trafficking chain thrives on loopholes, weak enforcement, and complicity. Corrupt recruiters pay no penalty. Abusive employers easily replace an escaped worker with a new recruit from the same network. NGOs estimate hundreds of thousands endure these conditions every year. Some Gulf nations have announced labor reforms, but on the ground, little changes. For survivors, freedom often brings lasting trauma. And for those still trapped behind closed doors, there's not even public awareness of their suffering. Eastern Bloc online grooming rings. In parts of Ukraine, Russia, Romania, and other former Eastern Bloc nations, a new kind of trafficking operates without ships, trucks, or border crossings. Instead, its roots are digital, and the crime scene is the internet itself. Small, scattered criminal cells target children and teenagers across the world through social media, gaming platforms, and chat apps. The tactic is deliberate. Build trust under false identities, a friendly gamer, a supportive big brother, even a potential romantic partner. Once the relationship feels safe, the trap closes. Victims are pressured into exchanging explicit photos or videos. Then comes the blackmail. Comply further, or these will be shown to your family, friends, the entire internet. Many are coerced into live-streamed exploitation sessions, broadcast on hidden networks for paying customers, viewers who might be continents away. The dark web shields the trade. Hidden sites accessed through encryption, payments in untraceable cryptocurrency, servers bouncing across jurisdictions. Because victims remain in their own homes, abuse often goes undetected for months or years. Parents hear nothing, see nothing. From the outside, life looks normal. Law enforcement faces a maze, VPNs, fake accounts, overlapping jurisdictions, which allows one dismantled ring to be instantly replaced by another in a different apartment, a different country. The harm lingers long after the grooming stops. Survivors battle years of shame, isolation, and fear, knowing the material may still be online, traded in hidden forums they can't access and can't erase. There is no full recovery when your exploitation has been recorded and sold to strangers across the globe. Golden Triangle syndicates. Where the borders of Laos, Myanmar, and Thailand meet lies the Golden Triangle, once notorious for heroin, now infamous for something even more complex. Human trafficking disguised as modern business. Criminal syndicates here have adapted to the digital era. They lure victims, often from poorer neighboring countries, but increasingly from Africa and even Europe, with promises of legitimate jobs in hospitality, call centers, or tech companies. Once across the border, passports are confiscated. The job turns out to be inside heavily guarded compounds, where victims are forced into online fraud, crypto scams, or cyber extortion rackets. Escape is nearly impossible. Security is run like a paramilitary unit. Electric fences, armed guards, and walls keep workers in as much as they keep law enforcement out. Those who resist face torture, starvation, beatings, and some simply disappear. Another brutal branch of the trade involves forced marriages. Women from rural villages or minority communities are trafficked into cross-border unions, often to China or within ethnic militia areas, where they lose all legal rights and face years of abuse and isolation. The reach of these syndicates is largely Asia-Pacific focused, but their scams and exploitation generate global victims. From Australia to the United States, people have unknowingly lost savings to fraud run from Golden Triangle compounds. This dual victimhood, enslaved workers and scammed customers, adds chilling complexity to their operations. Local law enforcement is often outgunned or complicit, and the area's fragmented political control, with militias, drug lords, and corrupt officials all jockeying for power, gives these networks extraordinary longevity. In the Golden Triangle, trafficking operates like a factory line: recruitment, control, exploitation, profit. Rohingya Exploitation Network. For the Rohingya people, A stateless Muslim minority from Myanmar's Rakhine state, flight has never meant safety. Driven from their homes by decades of persecution, and in recent years by mass killings and burned villages, tens of thousands have fled by land and sea toward Malaysia and Thailand, hoping for refuge. Instead, many fall straight into the hands of trafficking networks. These syndicates operate like shadow travel agencies, boat journeys arranged for desperate families at high prices. Midway, the business model shifts from smuggler to slave trader. Those who can't pay more are beaten, starved, or sold. Women and girls are often trafficked into forced marriage or the sex industry. Men are sent to labor camps, fishing trawlers, or plantations, their wages pocketed by their captors. In 2015, the world briefly stared into this market's depths when Thai authorities discovered hidden jungle camps along the Malaysia-Thailand border. Inside, mass graves, cages, and shack-like barracks where victims have been held for months. Survivors told of torture, rape, and executions for trying to escape. The discovery sparked outrage, high-profile arrests, and promises of reform. But awareness was temporary. The same refugee routes remain in use. And with Rakhine State still unsafe, traffickers have an endless supply of vulnerable people. Many officials in transit countries look the other way, bribed or intimidated into silence. Prosecutions are rare, convictions rarer still. For the Rohingya, every escape attempt is a gamble. Some make it to safety after months in hiding. Others vanish entirely, their families never learning if the sea claimed them, or if they ended up a nameless body in a camp the world will never find. Tri-border cartels. At the meeting point of Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina lies the so-called tri-border area, a maze of jungle, rivers, and bustling border towns where three countries meet and law enforcement from all sides struggles to coordinate. For decades, it has been a hub for smuggling, electronics, drugs, counterfeit goods. But within that trade, human trafficking has flourished. Here, organized crime groups blend people into their multi-commodity pipelines. Women are lured from impoverished rural communities across South America, Paraguay, Bolivia, even deep into the Amazon, with promises of hospitality or retail jobs in big cities. Instead, they are moved across borders into brothels, clandestine clubs, or hidden in agricultural labor camps. Like their drug shipments, victims are treated as cargo. The same corrupt customs officials or forged documents that move cocaine or contraband cigarettes also ferry people. Because the borders are porous and the river crossings routine, victims vanish without much trace, absorbed into criminal industries that operate openly alongside the lawful economy. The trafficking here is partly opportunistic, moving people when space is available in existing smuggling routes, but it's also calculated. Migrants who can't pay passage fees can be sold to criminal enterprises further down the chain, from sex work rings in Sao Paulo to forced labor on the fringes of Brazilian agriculture or in Argentina's sweatshop. Efforts to dismantle this trade are hampered by jurisdiction battles, corruption, and the sheer profitability of moving people alongside drugs and goods. Arrests tend to take out low-level operatives, while regional kingpins remain untouched. Camorra and Nigerian mafia alliance. In southern Italy's farmlands, waves of migrant workers, mainly from Nigeria, Ghana, and West Africa, pick tomatoes, olives, and citrus for Europe's supermarkets. Many are trapped in a brutal system called caporalato, a form of labor trafficking run by a dark alliance between the Camorra, one of Italy's most powerful crime groups, and the Nigerian mafia. Migrants are lured with promises of legal jobs but arrive to find no contracts, no protections, and wages as low as 2 or 3 euros for a full day's work. The Camorra controls farms, housing, and transport, ensuring total dependence. Nigerian networks, meanwhile, smuggle women and girls into Europe, often via Libya, and force them into the sex trade in cities like Naples and Palermo. Victims, saddled with huge debts to smugglers, are trapped for use by violence and juju, a form of witchcraft that enforces psychological control. The partnership is efficient. The Camorra provides infrastructure, corrupt officials, and territory, while Nigerian groups handle recruitment and control over migrants before they reach Europe. This seamless system is hard for police to penetrate. Investigations often collapse due to intimidation and witness fee. NGOs have documented inhumane labor camps and widespread abuse, but prosecutions are rare. The demand for cheap labor and illegal sex work keeps the pipeline open. While concentrated in southern Italy, the network's influence extends into Spain, France, and beyond, making it a key hub in Europe's trafficking landscape. For the Camorra and their Nigerian partners, exploitation is an industry. In Europe's agricultural heartlands, the produce in your kitchen may have been picked by someone who will never see freedom. Gulf kafala exploitation rings. Across the oil-rich Gulf nations, millions of migrant workers arrive each year chasing better wages for their families back home. Many never imagined that the legal system meant to manage their employment, the kafala sponsorship system, could become the very cage that traps them. Under kafala, a worker's legal status is entirely tied to their employer. This gives the employer near total control, the ability to cancel visas, block job changes, or deny the worker the right to leave the country. For traffickers, it's the perfect legal cover. Victims, often domestic workers from South and Southeast Asia or construction laborers from East Africa, have their passports confiscated the moment they arrive. Promised salaries shrink or vanish. Days stretch into 16-hour shifts. In construction, laborers are forced to work in extreme heat with little water. In private homes, domestic workers live in isolation, often enduring physical, verbal, or even sexual abuse. Protests or escape attempts rarely lead to justice. Instead, workers face arrest for absconding, fines, or deportation. With labor courts moving slowly and translation barriers high, many choose silent endurance over an unwinnable fight. The profit for exploiters is enormous. Unpaid or underpaid workers build skyscrapers, clean palaces, and maintain the luxury lifestyle the Gulf is famous for, with almost zero labor cost. While some nations have announced reforms, changes on paper are often undermined by lax enforcement, corrupt recruiters, and employers who simply find ways around the law. The scale is staggering. Hundreds of thousands of workers may be experiencing forced labor conditions at any given moment, hidden in work sites or behind the walls of private homes. Trafficking here doesn't need smugglers or false passports. It thrives in the space between legality and morality, turning a visa contract into a set of invisible chains. Sahel-Sahara smuggling rings. Across the Sahel, the arid belt stretching from Senegal to Sudan, tens of thousands risk everything to reach Europe. Their path runs through some of the most unstable regions on Earth, and at the heart of it lies a ruthless network of smugglers-turned-traffickers. It usually begins in West African countries, Nigeria, Mali, Ivory Coast, where recruiters promise migrants safe passage to Libya or across the Mediterranean. Families pool savings to pay for the trip, but the journey north is brutal. Packed into pickup trucks, migrants cross the Sahara under searing heat. Water is rationed, breakdowns are deadly, and those who collapse are often abandoned to die in the sand. Once in Libya, the business changes from smuggling to slavery. Unable to pay rising fees, migrants are detained in makeshift prisons, beaten, and sold at open-air slave auctions, a practice exposed to the world in 2017 when hidden camera footage emerged of men being traded for a few $100s. Women are often taken into sex trafficking networks, while men are forced into hard labor in agriculture, construction, or militia-controlled work camps. Law enforcement is almost non-existent along these routes, and in many cases, local militias and corrupt officials are part of the chain. Libya's political chaos provides near-total immunity for traffickers, while poverty and conflict in the Sahel ensure a constant supply of desperate people. Few who enter this system reach Europe unscathed. Many disappear, their families left with no word of their fate. Those who survive often carry physical scars and deep trauma, having been caught in a modern slave trade that still operates in plain sight. The Sahel-Sahara rings show trafficking stripped to its rawest form. No legal loopholes, no false promises left intact, just a market where human lives are openly bought and sold on the road to a dream that most never reach. Sinaloa Cartel's Migrant Exploitation Wing. The Sinaloa Cartel, infamous for its global drug empire, also profits from the endless flow of migrants heading north to the U.S. border. For many fleeing Central American violence and poverty, Mexico is a perilous corridor. In cartel-controlled areas, migration becomes a trap. Human smugglers, or coyotes, operate with cartel permission or oversight. Once migrants are captured, the operation shifts to extortion. Families back home receive ransom demands. If money isn't sent quickly, migrants are beaten, sold to other gangs for forced labor or sex work, or simply disappear. Cartel-run stash houses along the route are notorious for overcrowding, squalor, and abuse. Migrants face the same brutality as drug rivals: torture, intimidation, and killings meant to send a message. Some are forced to carry drug loads across the border, a high-risk job that can mean prison or death. Others are enslaved in agriculture, construction, or criminal enterprises across Mexico. The constant flow of people worsens the scale. Every migration season brings new victims, so the cartel doesn't need to hold anyone long. Turnover is fast, and fear is constant. Law enforcement focuses mainly on drugs, leaving human trafficking as a secondary concern. This creates a perfect ecosystem for abuse, high demand for illicit labor and sex work, an endless supply of vulnerable people, and a cartel infrastructure built to move goods, hide people, and launder profits. For the Sinaloa cartel, human trafficking doesn't replace the drug trade, it runs alongside it. For migrants caught in its grip, The dream of reaching safety in the U.S. often ends long before the border, sometimes with a shallow grave in cartel territory. Balkan route crime families. The Balkan route, infamous for heroin smuggling into Western Europe, also hides a vast human trafficking trade. Organized crime families from Albania, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, and beyond control a pan-European sex trafficking pipeline. Women and girls, often from rural Eastern Europe or impoverished post-Soviet states, are lured with false promises of jobs as models, waitresses, or domestic workers. Once trafficked, the passports are seized, debts are fabricated, and their movements are tightly controlled. The route winds west through the Balkans into EU countries like Germany, Italy, France, and the Netherlands. Victims are forced into brothels, massage parlors, or hidden in private apartments, constantly moved to evade police. Political corruption shields the network, border guards wave traffickers through, and local officials accept bribes to look away. Some traffickers even feed information to law enforcement, sacrificing rivals to protect their own operations. Escape for victims is rare. Language barriers, isolation, threats to families back home, and mistrust of police keep them trapped in cycles of abuse. Threats are real, especially in regions where crime families wield power. Even when trafficking rings are broken, they quickly reform under new names and leaders. The infrastructure, safe houses, transport, corrupt contacts, is so entrenched that arrests barely disrupt the trade. Ongoing migration toward Western Europe ensures a steady supply of new victims. The Balkan route remains one of the world's most entrenched trafficking corridors. For the crime families who run it, borders are meaningless, and the women they move are treated as mere commodities. Zarqawi and post-ISIS slave markets. In the chaos of Iraq and Syria's wars, one of the most chilling forms of trafficking emerged: systematic enslavement as official policy. Its roots trace back to Abu Musab al-Zarqawi's al-Qaeda in Iraq in the early 2000s, but under ISIS's self-declared caliphate between 2014 and 2017, it became an industrial-scale crime. Entire communities, especially the Yazidis, a Kurdish religious minority in northern Iraq, were targeted. When ISIS forces swept into Yazidi towns in 2014, men and older boys were executed on the spot. Women and children were divided by age and value, then transported to slave markets. Captives were catalogued, priced, and sold to fighters or foreign buyers. Unlike most trafficking, this was proudly documented. ISIS propaganda bragged that enslavement was justified by their extremist interpretation of scripture, a revival of practices seen as abolished centuries ago. Victims endured repeated rape, forced marriage, beatings, and forced conversions. Children were indoctrinated or, in the case of boys, trained as fighters. The territorial spread at ISIS's peak was enormous, across Iraq, Syria, and into Libya, creating cross-border slave routes guarded as tightly as military supply lines. Even as the group lost territory, captives were moved deeper into remaining strongholds, hidden with sympathizers, or smuggled into other conflict zones. International forces and local militias eventually liberated thousands, but thousands remain unaccounted for. Many are likely dead. Others may still be held in secret by individuals or sold into unrelated trafficking networks. Survivors speak of chains not only made of steel but of fear, of returning to families who may have also been destroyed, of living with the stigma of what was done to them. Snakehead syndicates. For over 40 years, snakehead syndicates from southern China, mainly Fujian and Guangdong, have run one of the world's most enduring human trafficking empires, moving Chinese migrants to every continent. Marketed as immigration services, snakehead operations offer passage to countries like the US, Canada, the UK, or Australia for fees often exceeding tens of thousands of dollars. Families mortgage homes or borrow heavily, believing the debt can be repaid quickly abroad. The reality is far harsher. Migrants are smuggled via complex, multi-leg routes using false passports, corrupt officials, and safe houses in transit countries from South America to Africa. On arrival, passports are seized and debts, often inflated with interest, are enforced through threats, violence, and coercion. Victims are forced into labor in restaurants, factories, construction, or illegal businesses like cannabis farms and counterfeit goods. Women may be pushed into sex work to repay debts faster. Payment is not optional. Failure can mean harm to relatives back in China. This ability to control both the migrant and their family is key to the syndicate's resilience. Law enforcement crackdowns in the 1990s and 2000s, especially after tragedies like the 2000 Dover container deaths in the UK, disrupted some leaders, but the business simply splintered into smaller, independent cells linked by shared contacts and routes. This decentralization makes snakeheads extremely hard to dismantle. Today, snakehead networks adapt with digital communication, encrypted payments, and new migration loopholes. For desperate migrants, they are both a lifeline and a trap, the promise of a future, bought at a cost that can take years or a lifetime to repay. Global, deeply rooted, and always evolving, snakeheads show that in trafficking, geography is no barrier and there is no final crackdown.